Hello, everyone.
How are you,
Hello to everyone who just joined us. And hello to everyone who's been around with us for some time already. We're happy to see you. And we have a very special guest with us today. So it's an EngX Community Day right now, so 2023. And we have Scott Hanselman as our guest. He will be discussing the topic of moving 17 years of old legacy code and sites into cloud. Just before we start, just a couple of notes. This talk will be recorded and will be available in approximately 1 week. So no worries if you miss it. You can still recommend this to your friends. And the most important, you can leave the questions on agenda page. Yeah, anywhere you see the box, you can type your questions, and we'll try to answer those questions that you might have. So right now, let me introduce Scott. So I'm sure that you already know him, but still, he's been a developer for many, many years. He's been leading a development community at Microsoft, developer community at Microsoft. He's a speaker, he's an author. And we are very excited to listen to his speech. I won't take any more of your time. Scott, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. So, my friends, here's the situation. I have a website at hanselman.com that I've had for a very, very long time. You can see that right up here. I've owned that domain for quite a long time. I've also got a podcast called Hansel Minutes. We'll talk about that domain in a little bit. I've got over 900 episodes of that show. And then I've also got a blog that I've been at for 20 plus years at hanselman.com/blog. Now I'm showing you these different things because the deal is that I've had these websites for many, many years, Hansel Minutes, and then hanselman.com/blog, we're going to treat that as a separate website. And those have been around for forever. And keeping a website running is a chore, right? You don't just throw them up there and trust your hoster. Things go wrong. DNS records need to be updated. SSL certificates need to be refreshed and restored and renewed. You have to pay your bills. Things happen, right? So keeping a machine running, keeping multiple domains running for a very, very long time is an ongoing and forever challenge. I've also got little websites. I've got websites like Baby Smash, which was a game that I wrote for my son. And Baby Smash puts colors and characters up on the screen. Now that baby from Baby Smash is going to be graduating from high school, but the website is still there. The game still works. People still download it. And there's a little, donate on PayPal button over here on the corner. So that's one example of the 50 plus domains that I have that are out there running live. Another one is keysleft.com, which is literally a website that is here to support my talk on productivity, about how many keystrokes you have left in your hands before you die. You can type in how old you are. You can type in how fast you type, and it'll tell you how many keystrokes you have left and how many books you can write and how many computer programs you can write. Now, the reason that I'm showing you all of this is that this is kind of like my digital legacy. Okay, this is all the stuff in my life that I keep online. Now, at Microsoft, where I work, I've only been here for 16 years, but I've been in tech for 30 plus, and these websites have been around for 20, 22, 23 years. I was what's called an MVP. Microsoft has this concept of the MVP, which is like an influencers program. And the influencers program at Microsoft will sometimes get you free stuff. They'll give you like a little bit of Azure time, or they'll have a third party come along and give you some free software, some free licenses. So somewhere around the year 2000 or the year 1999, there was a hosting company that was called OrcsWeb. And OrcsWeb was a hosting company that said, hey, we'll give MVPs and influencers free hosting. So I'm thinking, this is fantastic. I like free hosting. I would like from free hosting. And I think it ended up being $50 a month. And it was basically the promise of a Windows VM. They said, hey, you're an MVP. We'll give you a Windows virtual machine and you can go and host your website on it. So I'm like, this is great. I'll put Hanselman.com on this free Windows VM. And all they asked for was a little icon at the bottom. So I'm thinking this is a great idea. So I put this thing on a Windows VM, and I think it ended up being Windows Server 2000. And I'm running IIS, the Internet Information Server that's built into Windows Server 2000. And the website at the time happens to be running .NET 1.1. And I think at some point it ends up being on .NET 2. But to give you context, this is now 20-plus-year-old versions of .NET. And these versions of .NET only on Windows. Right? Now, this is before the cloud exists, right? The cloud's been around for maybe 15 years. The cloud wasn't a concept. At this point, we simply have this idea of hosting, and hosting are other people's computers. And migrating to the cloud is a thing that people have to think about. It's a challenge, but a lot of people do it very naively. And we're going to talk about that and why it's interesting and how we moved all of this stuff to the cloud, keeping in mind that this represents Hanselman International, which is really just me, right? Everyone who's on the call here probably has some domains that they're not using. They may have a blog that they're maintaining. They may have their online digital life. Keeping these things running is a challenge. And the difference between running it in a hosting service and running it in the cloud is very different, especially since you feel like it's Hanselman International. You feel like it's the big important thing that's in your life, but really I don't have a company. It's just me and my blog and my podcast, right? So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about how excited I am to get my $50 a month of free stuff. So I start running all of these domains over on this virtual machine. It's a small Windows VM. And this small Windows VM is chugging along very nice. And somewhere around 2017, 2018, maybe 2019, I start getting the yellow screen of death. And if you're familiar with the yellow screen of death, the yellow screen of death looks like this. Not that one, this one. This is the ASP.NET yellow screen of death. Basically, you get an exception from your code, and if you didn't configure your system correctly, that exception then spits your code out onto the screen and shows everyone the complete call stack. So it's a kind of a doubly or triply embarrassing thing in the .NET space. You're seeing your code, you're seeing you didn't configure your application correctly, and the fun part is that it will put exactly why it's happening here. So it'll say, in this case, conversion failed, but I had a very, very interesting yellow screen of death. My yellow screen of death said disk full. All right, so disk full seems like a problem. But remember, I haven't thought about this machine in, gosh, 17 years, 18 years. And that can be really challenging because I don't know the status of the machine. And I don't know if how big the disks are. I literally haven't thought about it in 10 or 15 years because it's just running. But it's a virtual machine, so it's being backed up, and I'm not really worried about it too much. All right. So disk full got me worried. So I call OrcsWeb. Now here's where things get a little scary. OrcsWeb doesn't exist anymore. They got bought. OrcsWeb got bought by a French-Canadian company called SureWeb. And SureWeb is up in Quebec. And they bought all of the stuff that OrcsWeb, all the assets. So I call OrcsWeb and they said, we don't exist anymore. We're SureWeb. We're a French-Canadian company. And I said, all right, that's great. I'm Scott Hanselman. I need you to find out what's going on with my disk. Okay. So the deal is that I want them to find the virtual machine and I want them to expand the disk space, right? That seems like a very reasonable thing, right? can I get more disk space? Here's where it gets bad. All the French Canadians, and I asked them, have you, do you know where my machine is? What's going on? And they said, we don't even know who you are. Turns out that when they gave us all free stuff, only a couple of people took them up on it. Hey, sir, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. I've asked Archil and the others if any questions pop in during the talk. Because it's live, we don't want it to be like a YouTube. We want the conference to be interactive. I said, please interrupt me if you have any good questions. So definitely unmute if you need to, if you've got any good information, okay?
Okay, I will.
I appreciate that. Because it's when we do a great virtual conference like this, like the folks at the community here are putting on for you, these community days need to be interactive. They need to be not just like watching a YouTube. So definitely interrupt. So, and this is great because now I can see his face and it makes me happy because he's my audience now. It turns out only a couple of MVPs asked for the virtual machines. So I called them and I said, well, hang on a second. Where is this thing? And they said, we don't actually know where your computer is. Now, Archil, have you ever seen the end of Indiana Jones, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, the old movie from the 80s?
I'm very ashamed to say no.
Let's see if you recognize this scene. Do you remember at the very, very end when they take the Ark of the Covenant into a warehouse? That's where my computer is. You have to understand that the hosting service is putting all of these computers in a giant warehouse, right? And they're managing them in a massive server farm. And at the end of Indiana Jones, the whole movie ends up with this amazing artifact, this precious artifact that then just gets put in a pile of other precious artifacts. This is the part that's interesting about hosting. No computer is more important than my computer, but only to me. Everyone else's computer and your computer are most important to you. So what turns out was the virtual machine that I was getting for free from our friends was not really a VM. It was actually a physical computer under someone's desk who had this idea, and they were going to move it to a VM at some point in the future. But no one actually took them up on it. Then they got bought, and then this machine gets slowly moved until at this point it is sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and they literally don't know where it is. The worst part is that the disk space of this VM is 30 gigs. Now, why is that a problem? That sounds like an immense amount of space, but I've swallowed accidentally more than 30 gigs before. You know what I mean? If you just put it in your mouth and you walk around, you go, that's not a lot of space. So what used to be 20 years ago, a massive disk is now completely filled, and it's filled up with log files and garbage. So I end up having to remote desktop into the machine and delete log files, which are then filling up because I'm getting more exceptions. And it's this awful situation where suddenly now I am responsible for the care and feeding of a server. And this is fundamentally why the cloud exists. If someone gives you, hey, free server, that's like them saying, hey, free puppy. You got to feed it, you got to water it, you got to walk it, you got to take it out. But what do I want to do? I just want to run Hanselman International. I just want to run my websites. And this is really important because this is the difference between IaaS and PaaS and SaaS. Infrastructure as a service is, hey, free computer. And platform as a service is, hey, I'll run your application and I'm going to hide this. And software as a service is, I'll just run everything for you. You just have to bring content. So I was suddenly giving myself this decision of like, maybe this free Windows VM was a bad idea. And now I want to change my perspective. But the disk is filling up. The disk is filling up and my blog is down regularly. So what do I have? I have my website, I have my podcast, and I have the blog. And the blog represents 20 plus years of content. And this is very stressful for me because I don't want to lose that. But of course, it's a VM. But then I learned that it's not a VM. Even worse, it's never been backed up. The entire time I've been running this thing on metal. So here's the next question. I'm sure you've seen this, sir. Have you seen the inside of a hard drive? A lot of people who are a certain age will remember this, but people don't realize that physical hard drives are platters like record players, and it's got spinning metal and rust. These are the heads of the platters, and they're stacked like records on top of each other. So we would hear things in the past like a head crash when the head crashes into the platter. And when you think about somewhere in a warehouse with Indiana Jones, your blog is on that platter, that starts being very nerve-wracking, and that's why you want to have backups. So I need to get that information off of this really, really quickly. So what's the easiest thing to do when you're migrating to the cloud? Lift and shift. We hear this when we talk to the people who want to sell you, cloud time. Oh, you just lift and shift. But what have you actually done? You've picked it up off of a physical machine and you've stuck it into a virtual machine in the cloud. That gets me out of the stress of the spinning hard drives. That gets me less concerned about my disks. But this is we call that a naive migration. It's naive because all I'm doing is moving my problem. It's still a VM I have to run. It's still an operating system I have to manage. It's got really nothing to do with the application. It's good for some people, but as a general rule, you want to ask yourself, is picking up a computer and moving it somewhere else helpful? It's just like taking your car and you putting it into another garage. You still have to deal with it and manage it. So there's an opportunity here for me to move the website, but I don't have an ops team. I don't have a lot of money here. How do I do this? I can't just call the team, hey team, move us to the cloud. So when migrating things to the cloud, the most important resource, in my opinion, that we have that we don't actually use is DNS. In this world 20 years ago, Hanselman.com had an actual IP4 address, and it actually pointed to a physical computer. Okay. And that physical computer was that machine sitting in that warehouse, and it actually terminates at IIS, that's the Windows server, and the SSL certificate terminates there as well. So I was updating the SSL certificate by remote desktoping into a physical computer and updating the SSL. That's how things were done 20 years ago. But how do we do things now? Well, with DNS, we put it somewhere like Cloudflare or Azure Front Door or some terminating server whose job it is not to serve web pages, but is to serve the certificate. And then that reverse proxies the data off to, and this is the part that gets interesting, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three different machines. Then you can have load balancing. That front door acts as a load balancer. So then the question is, can I use DNS to migrate my personal blog to the cloud? And this is, again, not just my blog, but this is how people do stuff. If you were going to do a migration for a production website, you do it this way as well. So I made staging.hanselman.com. And then I started figuring out how can I deploy my application to Azure, to the cloud, in such a way that I can have the site running twice. I have the dying site, Hanselman.com, and then I have staging.hanselman.com, which is my new site that's slowly coming up. And then I'm going to switch these gently over the course of a period of time and prove out the point. But remember, we have a couple of issues. We have the fact that it's running on .NET 2. We have the fact that it's Windows only. We have the fact that it's Windows Server 2000. So now I have to ask myself questions. Do I go to a new Windows? Do I go to maybe using Linux? Do I move to .NET 6.7.8, which is cross-platform? We would call that .NET Core. What's the easiest thing for me to do to get the most portability and the most flexibility, remembering that I don't want to manage a physical computer? These are the kind of questions you want to ask yourself. If it were truly legacy, meaning running software that can only run on Windows, that's a good reason to have a virtual machine. I could run .NET, an old unsupported version of .NET 2 forever, effectively in the cloud. However, There's another challenge, which is security. There's a website called Security Headers that I really enjoy. And you can go in here and you can put your website in, okay? And I don't want to, I was trying to think, Archel, do you have a website we could put in here that maybe do you have a blog or a personal website you want to sacrifice to the gods, the demo gods?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Okay. Well, we'll
Maybe
put in
we could put your, current, yes.
Yeah. So I got an A, but what I was hoping to do is that you would give me a website and they would get an F, because there's all these headers and certificates that have to be set up in order to get the good grade. And what was happening was Windows Server 2000 is so old that it can't do TLS. It can't do the kinds of modern security that is required. So if I were to run this machine in the cloud, this old computer, I'd still really need something in front of it, because I'm effectively asking for trouble. So even though virtual machines are great, they can manage legacy software forever, you don't want to put them on the open internet. So I would have wanted to think about security from that respect. So there's a good reason to not do that. Plus, the new versions of .NET run on Linux. Maybe I could move to a more flexible system, and in doing that, save some money, because Linux is cheaper to host on, and offer a lot more general development flexibility in case I want to move somewhere else in the future. So .NET has a thing called the .NET Migration Assistant. .NET, I guess they renamed it the Upgrade Assistant. And this is a really great application that will do things two ways. You can load it into Visual Studio, run your application, and it will tell you if it can upgrade it or not. Or you can do it at the command line. Totally up to you. The CLI tool will actually walk you through upgrading of your application, and it can do it either what's called in place or side by side. So my application that I now want to run on Windows, I want to start with my Hanselman.com, is a pretty portable application. It's an application that just has Razor pages. So then we have to ask ourselves, does it have any Windows dependencies? Does it use the registry? Does it have a backslash instead of a forward slash? These are the kinds of things that, of course, if I called an API asking for the registry, but I'm on Linux, it's not going to work. If I ask for a file in C:\Windows, it's not going to find that file, because everything is places like this on Linux. A couple of days of light work, and I was able to get Hanselman.com running on Linux. And what's great about that is on Windows, I can go into the Windows terminal here. You can see right now I'm actually in Windows. This is my prompt. Here's the Hanselman source code right here. I also have my current Git branch and the version of .NET that I'm using. And then just as an aside, this number here is actually my blood sugar. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I have sensors in my body, and I've got one plugged in my arm right here. And this sensor is telling me my blood sugar and sending it to the cloud, because I want to make sure that while I'm working on my website, I don't accidentally die. So that's showing me what my blood sugar is in real time. That's actually kind of cool, because I'm sure you might have your Git prompt in your prompt. What else might you want there? The temperature, the weather, version of Node, things like that. So here I can then say .NET build. I can go and build the Hanselman website on Windows, and we know it works just fine. But I can also switch over to Ubuntu. So here I am on Windows. As we know, Windows runs WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux. And the Windows subsystem for Linux is truly Linux on Windows, which means that I can validate the running and development of my application on Linux. I'll prove it again. This is Ubuntu 2204. We'll say .NET build. And that's the Hanselman website running on Linux. Why is that important? Choice. It's important because choice. Because then I can go and I could take the podcast website right here, and I could put it in Docker. So slowly I'm moving from .NET 2 to .NET 4 and then to .NET, at this point, 7 or 8. It's not hard to upgrade, and I'm getting huge performance benefits, and more importantly, I'm getting portability. Once I've created a Docker file, now I have the ability to go and build this application on Linux. This is the podcast site, which includes tests, unit tests, playwright tests. It's quite a complicated application. That's going to give me the flexibility that I need to get off of Windows Server 2000, 20-plus-year-old server. And now I can run it on either Linux or Windows, whichever one is going to work better for me. So then Hanselman.com, which points to that dying computer in the back office, still points there, but staging then points to the new system. This is where things are going to get more interesting. I can go to the Azure portal, go to Azure Front Door. Azure Front Door, very similar to Cloudflare. And in the Front Door Designer, we can set up front-end domains that point to back-end pools and then come up with routing rules on how to manage those. What we're doing here is we're setting up back-end infrastructure, a Linux machine that's going to run the website, and we're going to bounce between staging and Hanselman.com. And I'll say to start, 90% of the traffic is going to hit here, and then 10% of the traffic will hit staging, and then I'll slowly move it until people are only hitting the staging one and prove that that's working or not. And then now you can see in the little warning that Azure is giving me, staging is no longer present because I've pulled staging out completely. It's not serving production anymore. When we are using DNS as that front end to save us, it's a pointer to a pointer, right? That DNS is acting as the layer of abstraction. It's, I think, in my opinion, not used enough. When I moved the Hansel Minutes podcast, I got some complaints from people who were saying that the pictures were loading slowly. Well, it turns out that there's 900 pictures on this page. So I added lazy loading. You can see how they turn gray. So that's one solution. But if I right-click on a picture and I open it in a new tab, the real solution was, again, DNS. By putting the images on images.hanselminutes.com, I got two benefits. One, that's actually a CDN now. So that's going to load close to you, even though the website might be close to me. And I get parallel loading because I think between 5 and 7 threads can spin up in your browser, and we can do parallel HTTP gets. So by simply moving the responsibility off of the main website and having images having to be its own thing allowed me a lot of flexibility. So now if I look at a talk, the image came from one place, the JavaScript came from one place, the HTML came from one place, and the MP3 came from another. Meaning I get maximal parallelism. You get the content closest to you. And remember, all of this content used to be sitting on a physical machine. And the changes that we're making to do this are minimal. We're literally talking about changing a URL to point somewhere else. So by changing that DNS, we get an immediate benefit. The code changes are truly minimal. And you can see that the speed of the website is significant. We can prove that, in fact, by looking at a dashboard. And this is another thing that I think that the cloud doesn't give enough credit for. Now, I'm a little bit old. I'm been doing this for 30 years. We used to hire a consultant to make a dashboard, and we would fly someone in with a suit, and they would create a dashboard, and they'd put it up on the screen, and we'd go, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing." And they would say, "Don't touch it. I configured it for you." I don't have a business. I just have me. I'm just Scott. All right. The idea that I could have a dashboard like this is amazing, but we all get it because of the cloud. The cloud isn't just hosting. It's not just a VM in a box somewhere. The cloud is elastic and self-serving. We can manage and support the application ourselves. So look, I have 3-millisecond freaking server response times. Now, what do you think these are? What are these spikes? 10 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds. This is another philosophy of the cloud. Do you have an idea of what it is?
Maybe
Do they look
spikes
regularly
user?
spaced? Say that again?
Spikes, maybe.
Those spikes are for caching. And see how nicely spaced they are. Because in the cloud, one of the things that we don't talk about is what is the cloud offering you that is the best value. And in my opinion, the cloud's best value is memory. Disk space is a little slow. Disk space, you might run out of disk space, but in the cloud, I've got here 4 applications. These are the 4 apps all running on one machine in the cloud. If I go and look at one of them, we can actually see the plan that it's running on, and you can see how full the memory is. I'm using a lot of it. If I were running a physical computer, and I was at 70%, I might say, wow, we need to get more memory. But this isn't a physical computer. I'm renting it. And you know how you drive a rental car differently than you drive your own car. You may be a little more aggressive in your rental car. You might care less about the car. I tend to drive my rental car, the cloud, a lot harder than I drive my own personal car. I don't baby the cloud. So in this case here, I am happy to fill this up. And you can see the spikes in my CPU are the cache expiring and then refilling. I actually run the blog, the podcast, the main site, and Azure Friday, which is yet another website, all in the same physical, what's called app service plan. It's a plan that can have as many apps as you want. And that is really flexible from a pricing perspective. And I can actually go and see the hardware. I can see exactly the memory and the scale and how much it'll cost an hour. And for basically $50, at $50 a month that I was running before 20 years ago, I'm running in a highly dense, highly intense environment. And if I ever, went viral, I could just spin it up, have an increase, move to a different machine, and have a better experience. In doing all of this, I've also realized that I didn't know how to deploy the site. Back in the day, 20 years ago, I FTP'd it. I just copied it from my laptop over into the cloud. So we have to acknowledge also that when doing this kind of work, without a good CI/CD, without a good formal build server, you're going to live in fear of your machine. I lived in fear of Hanselman.com. I was afraid to touch it. I didn't know how old it was. I didn't know what software it was running. And this is a funny thing people don't talk about is how do you feel about your software? Like I like my blog, but after about a year, I'm like, when did I deploy that? How did I deploy that? Did I deploy that from my laptop? What's running in production right now? So how do we solve those problems? Well, take a look at this. We're on the podcast site. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. In production, I actually put the version of .NET, the commit hash, and the build server on the website. Now, I'm doing this because I'm a public figure. You might want to hide that behind like a is administrator or is logged in. You wouldn't necessarily want to show that to everyone in the public. But the flexibility of this means that I can now right-click on that, and I can say, let's look at this commit. I'll switch over to my work machine. Log in real quick to GitHub. Sorry about that. Looks like I got logged out of GitHub, so I'm just going to do a little two-factor magic and log in. I can see that on June 15th in production, I switched from one version of a library to another version of a library. So in one click, I'm able to go and see that exactly what's going on. And then on that build server right here, I can see the build, go directly into Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, see what happened. I can click on the job and in fact, see the logs about the publish and the testing. Why this is interesting is before we started this, I had an old piece of software that I copied myself manually to a physical machine from my laptop. but by starting at the DNS level, giving myself a little space, by then porting it to Linux, getting it to build in Docker, then getting it to build in a build server, and then being able to push it out into the cloud, I'm adding a bit of formality to what I'm doing. And then because I'm in the cloud, I get dashboards for free. I get uptime checks for free. I even have the ability on my phone right here to have an app. And I've literally stepped out of a movie theater before and rebooted the server because someone texted me and said your site's down. So I go and check, and I can even see the charts and graphs from the phone. And that's really interesting to me because, again, many years ago, it would be a team of 10 people to get this. So the reason I point that out is that there's a lot of talk about, 10x developers, which I'm not a fan of that term, and how good someone is. I'm a mediocre programmer, but I have really great tools. So I become a 10x developer with these tools. It's not the skill, it's the tools, and knowing, in this case, how to do them. Another wonderful example is, look at these failed requests. There's some spikes here of failed requests. What's going on? How would I solve this in the old days? I would open text files and logs. I would write regular expressions. I would call for help. Let's find out. Let's click on one of these. We can see that there are some response codes that are coming back, error 400. Let's click on those. I can go over here and click on post. We can see that, look at this. Someone is trying to push a PHP application to my .NET application. It's failing, of course. And this is amazing. Show me what happened 5 minutes before and after. It's unbelievable that we have tools like this to us available as a person. In just seconds, I find an error, I see what's going on, I can click on it, and then build a telemetry request about how the person moved through the website and what they did and what they were clicking on and where they came from, and then can even expand all of these all the way down to, where did this person come from and why is someone attacking my website from Oregon? All of those things would have taken an afternoon to think about, and now can be solved in seconds, thereby making me feel like a 10x developer. But if I had kept that machine on a physical box in a warehouse, I never would have been able to do these experiences. So the takeaway here is to try to avoid these naive movements where you're doing what's called lift and shift. Lift and shift is step one. Lift and shift gets you into the cloud. But you want to ask yourself, how responsible do you want to be? Are you responsible for the hardware? Are you responsible for the platform? Or are you going to be responsible for the software? I want to be responsible for as little as possible. Another great analogy, we'll go ahead and unshare my screen now. Another great analogy here that I like to use is, some people like to drive stick shift. We are in a world where Uber exists and electric cars exist and self-driving cars exist, but people still like to drive stick. They still like to drive manual because it makes you feel attached to the car. It's okay that some people want to drive stick and some people want an Uber. And we have that available to us now in the cloud in those choices. Choice is okay. It's not only Uber, it's not only Tesla, it's not only stick shift, it's choice. And the fact that for some of my applications, I run them in virtual machines, and for other ones, I run them in a function, and I don't think about anything at all, the better. Great question here from Leanna in the chat here about, what is the database? Let's go ahead and reshare my screen again, and I'll show you the database. So you're going to laugh about this one. The database for this 20-year-old site is here. It is 5,000 XML files in a folder. Because what is a database, right? A database usually consists of a table and a series of records. So a file system is and was a valid kind of database. It's not a formal database like a Mongo or a MySQL or SQL Server, but it is a valid kind of database because I need to for loop over these, index them, and search them. I can do all of those things with a file system. So 20 years ago, when we designed this blogging engine, we made one file per day. And it worked. It works great. Now, I could load it all up into a database, put it in a MySQL, and then I would have a single file, but there would be 4,900 entries in that single file. The benefit of this is that I can take any one of these files, I can open it up in a notepad, and I can look at that entry and see the code and see the blog that I saw, which I would have less transparency if I were to do all of that the other way. So in this case, from a cloud perspective, this offers me an interesting opportunity. The opportunity is that I could move this into cloud storage, which, calling back to the very, very beginning of the conversation where I filled up my disk, that is no longer a problem. I would never have to worry about filling up my disk. I could blog until the end of time, and I will never fill up my disks. Which is another thing that's funny, is that there's not a lot of files here, even though it might seem completely insane and unhinged to have 5,000 files like this. 20 years of blogging represents only about a gigabyte of text. It's a gigabyte of text. Now, it's about 30 gigs if you count pictures, which is why things filled up. But that is not a very large amount of information. And then on the podcast over here, I've moved the podcast hosting. The website is mine. I wrote the website. It calls a REST API. And then that REST API is the database backend for the MP3 files. Great questions. Thank you so much for that. All right. So that is how I moved 17 years of software to the cloud, slowly, in a kind of a focused step-by-step way, making sure that the site stayed up the entire time, but also trying to minimize costs, maximize speed, and then also my own comfort. I wanted to have a dashboard. I wanted to have the ability to see all of these things in a CI/CD where I could check them in and have them just run. I wanted to have all the benefits of the cloud with minimal cost. And then the last part, of course, was being able to run it all in Docker was a huge benefit. And on Windows here, I'm running WSL. So if I go and say Docker build, here you can see Docker is not running. I will start Docker up on Windows, which will then enable it. There's Docker coming up. The Docker engine on Windows will allow me to use Docker on both Windows and on Linux. Being able to run it in a container in the cloud gives me more flexibility. There we go. There you go. And now I'm building on Windows, on Linux, while streaming to you all. I'm really happy with Windows right now. Like, Windows is really in a great place. So we're running Ubuntu, we're running Windows, we're talking to you all. Everything's very fast and responsive. This is building on .NET, and I've even put my unit tests inside of the Docker, and I put Playwright tests, and there you go. So now I've got the podcast in a Docker file ready to go. All right, I would love to hear some questions if we have any, Archel, from the audience.
Yes, I do. First of all, Scott, your blood sugar was raised, I see. So I hope you're doing well.
So that's a great example. Let's do that. We push. See, that went up. You know why blood sugar goes up? It's because the brain needs that sugar to give the presentation. So I'm still healthy. It's green, and the arrow is going this way and not that way. But you're very kind for noticing, and that's a great example of why running that server in the cloud is important to me, and why managing that information is important to me. So thanks for pointing that out.
I have a question myself. So first of all, thank you very much for sharing I would allow myself to say the intimate details of everything, because that was, you were very passionate and you showed many things, how it runs in real world. And we don't get to see too much of this, the backstage of it also. Thank you for that. I have one question. It stands out to me that you're very excited about the things you do. You seem very passionate, but you've been doing this for 30 years. And my question is, when you started saying like deploying files via FTP, just copy pasting, it took me back in the days when I used to do the same. So question sounds like this. Do you feel that as you've progressed and you've encountered when it was like things were hard to do just manually and then they got easier, do you think that it just helps you appreciate the technologies that we have now more because you've been through it all?
That is a fantastic question. It is the thing that is interesting about being an elder is the sense of history is overwhelming. It is, I'll give you an example. Okay. This is a Game Boy. Okay. I don't know when the Game Boy came out, late 90s, maybe early 90s. I don't know. It's a Game Boy. This is also a Game Boy, right? This is a 3D printed Game Boy that I made with a Raspberry Pi inside that runs every video game in the world. And this is a Game Boy. This, I 3D printed that. I additively manufactured that in my house. I bought a screen that came on a boat from China. I put a Raspberry Pi inside it. I ripped the buttons out of a Super Nintendo and I built that. That's unhinged. The sense of like that, and that happened in 20 years. Okay. That is a Game Boy that you can put on your keychain that actually runs. I can hear the little game going. You can see the little dude moving. I can't, how do you even deal with that? So when I'm at work and a younger, early in career person deploys a website and they go, oh, this website is taking a minute to, so slow. I am both saddened and heartened by that amazing sense of time and space that is allowing us to do that they don't have to wait the weekend for the build, or they don't have to get the punch cards. You know, here's a punch card, computer program in Fortran. They don't have to deal with that. But I also am sad about the loss of the history. But there is value in appreciating stick shift. But I don't want the young people to have to drive stick shift. So my suggestion is drive stick shift once, suffer once, and then enjoy your Uber or your Lyft or your taxi. You know what I'm saying? That's a long answer to your question, but yes, it is overwhelming. It is an amazing feeling, and I sometimes can't quite deal with it. And I have Game Boys that I can just pick up out of nowhere and show you, which is funny.
Yep, that was amazing. Following on that subject, like appreciation kind of things, I might have shifted to a bit different direction, so sorry for that, but yeah, I need to ask.
No, this is wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Do you have any suggestion for like keeping the passion for software engineering running throughout many years and maybe not switching to some different kind of thing? So how do you keep the passion in ever-evolving technologies when you constantly need to learn to just be up to date with technology? So what's the mindset that you have to just have that excitement? I mean,
yeah. There's two things that get me excited about technology. First, we need to remember why we make it. It's for humans. It's to make human suffering less. Otherwise, you're just goofing around. I don't want anyone to suffer. And if I can make a blood sugar system, or I can make a farmer more effective, or I can, make a young person entertained in a difficult time. These are all ways that we can use technology for humans. So whenever I'm down or feeling like maybe I'm losing my passion, I realize how powerful it is to help other humans. My dad and my mom are not computer people. My mom is a zookeeper. My dad is a firefighter and a woodworker. But in everything that they do, they help humans. If my dad makes a table and gives you a bench for your house, he's helped you as a human. If my mom is taking care of the animals and you go to the zoo, she's doing it for humans, So in the low points, I think to myself, I'm running a open source artificial pancreas. And as a diabetic, I would not be alive 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And I am, because my blood sugar management system runs on my phone. If you can't get excited about that, you have bigger problems. You know what I'm saying? I am excited because there's so much power in our hands now. And when we team up, we pair up like you and I are now, or we pair up with our coworkers and our colleagues, then two people become three and multiply each other. Imagine what Hanselman International could do if I had a partner. You know what I mean? I got all this done with just the tools. So the idea that a team of 30, 20 years ago could be a team of three now, and that startups are coming out with amazing applications that help humans, and they're doing it on a shoestring budget in the cloud and deploying it to pocket supercomputers. That's amazing. So yeah, that's how I stay excited about it.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions.
Yes,
First
sir.
one of them is Scott. They are asking, do you know if your old physical machine is still laying somewhere next to the archive with all your content? Was it deleted? Did you take care of it?
True story. It was 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. I can find the exact DM, and the website had finally gone down for good. And I tweeted, I'm sorry, the website is down. I'm going to work all night and fix it. It was the last gasp, like the death. Like that was the moment. So I tweeted, it's going down. A guy from the French company DM'd me on Twitter. He happened to be doing maintenance at 2 a.m. in the warehouse. And he said, I'm going to go and look for it. And he wandered the hallways of the place looking for the thing. And he like bonked it. I don't know if he hit it with a wrench or something, but he rebooted it. It came back for just a moment. I got the last files off of the thing, and it is now officially dead. But it was the craziest thing that he happened to be there and happened to be on Twitter at 2 a.m. doing late night maintenance, because they always do that kind of late night maintenance. But yeah, it's dead. It's officially dead.
Amazing. Thank you. I will switch to a bit different topic now, but we are talking about clouds. We've discussed the amazing benefits that the technology gives us. What do you think, what's the maybe misconception and another side of it, where, one should be more hesitant to switching to clouds or just be more careful? What's your take on that?
There are more moving parts. And I want to point out that even though I'm a fan of the cloud, I still acknowledge the value in running your own server, because it's about responsibility. Who is responsible for your uptime? Who is responsible for your server? For example, I'm bringing up my screen again over here, and I'll bring it up for you, and then they can bring it up again for us. There we go. So I have a personal server internally to my house server, and it uses the .local domain, which is .local means within our subnet, right? And this is called a Synology. So I have a physical machine. That is running in the other room there. So I trust the cloud, but I also have physical servers. So I'm not saying throw everything up into the cloud and forget about it, because you're trusting giant company. You also could lose access to your account. I'm saying a hybrid approach. I have all my photos in Google Photos, but I also have them all in Apple Photos, and I all have them on that Synology network attached storage in a room with 72 terabytes in my other server closet. So Hanselman International runs on another machine over there. So you ultimately are responsible for your uptime. And that's a hard thing to say because you go, well, hey, Microsoft, hey, Google, hey, Amazon. 5 nines, sure, maybe 4 nines, but that last 0.1, that's you. Your DNS, your backup DNS records. I worked in banking for a very, very long time, retail banking, and during Hurricane Katrina, when the hurricane went into New Orleans and took out a lot of those servers, we had geo-replicated the entire bank hundreds of miles north and fell back because when people want to get their money out of the bank, they want to get their money out of the bank. But when there's water in the server room, whose fault is that? That's an act of God. But you have to go and fall back. So disaster recovery, in my opinion, right now, is the least respected and least used computer skill. And I think everybody should reassert their backup and restore strategy. There's a funny saying that is, backups always succeed. It's restores that fail. It's because no one practices their restores. They only test their backups.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, sir.
So we have one more question in our chat. People relate to you being having high blood sugar, and they ask for more information on. In general, I would generalize the question a bit. So, what is it like to have that medical condition that you need to be very attentive to? You mentioned the terms that you might die in the work. So I'm really not sure, maybe that's not even a joke. So I don't know. Could you elaborate on how do you deal with that in your daily life? Because I'm seeing that our viewers have relatives or themselves that have conditions.
So that's a good question. And I'll try to do it in the last few minutes as we are at the last talk of the day. So it is an invisible disability, right? You can't look at me and say that guy has a problem, as opposed to someone who might have a wheelchair or an artificial arm. You look at me and you go, he's fine. But then when you see I have these things, like I have a pump attached to my body with an injector, and it's giving me the insulin, right? So there's a tube in me right now. And then on my arm, I have a sensor with Bluetooth that also has a needle in me, and that's checking my blood sugar. Those things are hidden from view. And there's you can't really see it, but my blood sugar is right there. And you saw it on the screen. I get concerned that kind of technology isn't available to everyone. So for our friends that are listening who may have an auntie or a mom or a brother or a sister who has this, some of those technologies are available. Some of them aren't. Some of them are available in parts of Europe, but not other parts of Europe. There's different countries with different medical rules. This is called a Dexcom. This is called an Omnipod. There's also the Freestyle Libre. Folks, feel free to reach out to me or look at the diabetes section of my blog. I've got a whole section talking in detail about diabetes on my blog, and I've just brought that up. I've been blogging about it for many, many years, and I talk about how these things work, how the pancreas works, how you can get involved, how you can find that equipment if you wanted to. And there's different open source groups, including Night Scout. The Night Scout organization is the open source project where I manage my blood sugar in the cloud. So if folks want to look at how they can potentially have their own glucose meter in the cloud, it'll actually walk you through a process of how to set that up and what that looks like. And this screenshot right here is an explanation of how my blood sugar goes into the cloud, transmitting from my body and then up into the cloud, and then onto my phone, which then talks to the insulin pump. This is all open source. So the hardware you have to get from your doctor, but the software is all free. And I'm not selling anything. I'm just a very excited community member. It sucks, but dying would suck worse. So I'm happy to be here. If it's a small thing, it's a small price to pay to be here.
Thank you for the answer. We have an interesting question regarding the carbon footprint. Now, our friend here is asking, so the cloud comes with all the easiness and all the functionality that you described, all the features that are easy to implement. But what's your take on, like, all that functionality comes with a price? It might not be the monetary kind of thing, but maybe the carbon footprint and environmental issues, just switching everything to clouds. And what's your take on that? How, like, from that perspective?
I go back and forth on the benefits of centralizing things versus decentralizing things, right? By centralizing things, you can destroy it, ruin it. Someone can mess it up, whether it be governmental centralization or whether it be cloud centralization. Same thing with power and water and things like that. I think, again, I come back to hybrid. I was in South Africa for a month, a couple of months ago this summer. And while I was there, the power went out and then the water went out. So then we thought to ourselves, we need to make our own power. We need to have our own water. We need a well. And it's like, it's not sustainable for every single person to have solar panels and batteries and their own power. And it's not sustainable for every single person to have a well. The greater good requires it. It's not sustainable for every single person to run a server in their back room. The cloud offers the benefits of scale and cost benefits. Remember that I'm paying $50 a month in 2023, and I was paying $50 a month 20 years ago, and I'm running more websites. So the cloud is offering me all those benefits. The CI/CD is free. The build server is free. That probably wouldn't be free if I was running it on my own hardware. Then I'd have to keep my hardware running. So there is benefit to the cloud from an eco-friendly perspective, because that change in scale means that when a company like Microsoft says it's going to be carbon neutral and they commit to it, they mean it, and they're going to do it, and they're going to put, solar panels on all of the Azure servers or however they're planning on doing it, which would be something I wouldn't be able to do. So the benefit of hybrid is the benefit of the economies of scale. And I'm being told we're running out of time, sir.
Yeah. If we have just one question, time for just one question, I'd be happy.
Yes, sir.
You've been running Hanselman family and all the related websites and applications on your own. You mentioned that you're just the owner of it and you've been running it all. My question, so when you do things and you kind of are alone, it's all your responsibility. Where do you draw a line on which of the modern practices and just tools or systems you like engineering things to implement in your systems so that you are able to cover it, the functionality of it all, because you're the only one working on that, but you also want to maintain the quality code. Just as an example, do you, for yourself, do code reviews when you think you are the only one contributing to that source code? So what's your take on that?
So I'll use code coverage as an example. I added code coverage support because I found it to be useful, and I found that my code coverage was about 60% and my tests were pretty good. It is unreasonable for me to take code coverage to 100%. I don't think that there's any value in that, because I increased code coverage until I became comfortable. I got my builds, my CI/CD working until I became comfortable. So comfort was a good metric. I trust my website will keep running. I am not too worried about it. If I were to apply arbitrary metrics like you don't have full test coverage, this doesn't run on FreeBSD, or this doesn't run on this operating system. My goal was to get it running on Alpine Linux, Windows, decent test coverage, and a good CI/CD system, and I called it. Should I do test-driven development? Yes, I should. Do I do that? I'm one guy. Do I have code reviews where I talk to myself in a room? I don't. If I had another partner, I would. You know what I mean? I think it's about pragmatism versus purity, and we go back and forth between pure and correct and super pragmatic. And that is a thing in all things, moderation in all things. You know, I may be diabetic, but I still enjoy ice cream. And the same thing applies in software engineering.
Thank you very much, Scott. This has been an awesome event. I'm sure that we and our viewers could go on for forever just listening to you. You've been amazing. You've been very inspiring. Thank you for being with us. And this is the last talk of EngX Community Day for today. For our viewers, thank you for staying with us, and we'll welcome you for tomorrow's event. Scott, good luck, and thanks very much for being with us this wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.